welcome to the Story Cafe. I'm your host, Karen Chace, and today our guest is Kelli Dunham from Brooklyn, New York. In 2015, Kelli was one of the nominees for the White House Champions of Change, and she was also named one of the 25 LGBT leaders by Velvet Park magazine. She has appeared on the Discovery Channel and Showtime. She has written 12 books, and she presents around the country to healthcare providers on the importance of LGBT health issues. Welcome, Kelli.
Oh, thank you so much. So good to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you made the trip. I feel like, we've just met, but I already feel like I know you really well. I told you when I was doing research on your work, I really felt like I fell down a rabbit hole. You've done so much in your life. It's just astounded.
I've lived a lot of different lives, yeah.
That's a great way
Yeah,
to put it. I really urge people to Google you and see all the different fabulous adventures, if I may, that you've
Adventures,
had.
Consensual and non-consensual, yeah.
Well, now you're doing different things, and one of the things you've started is something called Organ Recital, which is a storytelling festival. Can you share a little bit about that? What is that festival all about?
Well, I started out, shorthand is it's a festival of stories about bodies, health, and healthcare. It started out, I was seeing so many times in my work as a healthcare provider, I'm a nurse, and also I talked to a lot of friends who, because I'm kind of the resident nurse in the LGBT community, people bring things to me. And there's so many times, the healthcare system, it's meant for profit, it's meant for provider convenience, but the thing it's not really meant for is for patients to have a good experience. And so many people
excellent.
have either like untoward, either impacted by mistakes or near mistakes, or they just have a bad experience in healthcare. And I feel like the thing that actually healthcare providers usually want to do a good job. Nobody goes, I know for myself, there was hardly anybody in nursing school who was like, I want to go and I want to be an awful nurse. That wasn't anybody's goal. But the system is not set up, right? The system is set up for us to pit against each other. But the thing that we have in common, right, is as healthcare providers and as patients is the stories. And so I wanted to be able to get people together to tell those stories.
Now, is this once a year? How often do you have this?
I started out saying it was going to be yearly. That was way too ambitious. It's going to be every other year. It started out the first year. I rented out a performance space for a week, and I was like, okay, we're going to do a bunch of shows and workshops and stuff for a week long, and I was doing it just by myself. That was ridiculous.
Oh my
of course.
Goodness.
That was completely ridiculous. Most people were like, no, you start out a festival like 1 day or 2 days or something like that, not a whole entire week. Plus I was working full time at my day job as well. So that was way too ambitious. It was fun and it was great, and we had great crowds, but it was way too ambitious. So the next one will be in 2019.
Now, this is in New York. You have
Right.
this in New York. Do you select the people that are going to come and tell their stories, or do people come to the workshops and then develop a story to share?
Both. They happen both ways, and that's one of the reasons why I want to do it in 2019. Is I want to have a series. We're working on a series of workshops, specifically for people. So for what I did for the first one, is I selected people to curate. So, for example, I had a friend who wrote a book on surviving bipolar disorder.
Oh.
And so on February 14th, she did a show called I Love My Pre-Existing Condition, and it was all stories of the impact of the ACA, it was February 14th. It was, that's a hard day to bring people in, and it was stories about insurance, and it was packed. The place was packed. She did a fantastic job curating, and people really wanted to hear those stories.
That's amazing. So the audience response was really positive to this then.
Yeah, people were really surprisingly into it, because some of these stories are really serious and kind of grave, you know? And then we had one night that was curated by a stand-up comic, and she brought in all stand-up comics, New York stand-up comics, who have little bits of stuff that they were telling about illnesses and experiences in healthcare, but hadn't ever developed into a fuller part. So we had somebody who well-known stand-up, Ariel Levy, well-known stand-up comic, but had never talked on stage about having leukemia.
Oh.
And so she was like, oh my God, I really can talk about this on stage. This really does work, you know? So that was some of the stuff that made me happiest, is I felt like I was helping people be more real in their art and their stories. And I thought I felt really good about that.
It must be very powerful stories that you hear. I wonder, sometimes when people in the audience hear those kinds of stories, it can be a trigger for some people. Are there people there to help people if something comes up like that, a difficult story, or do you have information that you can give them where they could go to help with those sorts of things that might come up?
Well, one of the things I've always done with workshops is really had, and workshops specifically, not as much performance, like we start out with something you think about, if you're going to be writing about something that's really hard, because this is something, the workshops that I've done both for Organ Recital and for Queer Memoir, my storytelling series, is often it's about something difficult. So you start, before you even sit down to write, you think of a place where you felt really safe. And you try and, I know that word safe is like so politically charged right now, but a situation in which you felt whole and healthy, right? So, and you try and recreate it, you know, the smells, the sounds, everything, and think about that. And then when people are done writing for that workshop time, to recreate that, remember that space again and try and bring themselves back into it. So you kind of open up and then close back up. And I found that that's really been pretty effective. That helps people a lot.
Well, that's really excellent that you give them that tool so that they have something to fall back on.
Right, and if they're writing at home too.
Right,
Yeah.
if there's no one there to help them through that. Because if you're in a workshop and something like that happens a lot of times, you're in a workshop with a friend.
Right.
And so you have somebody there.
Or somebody that could be supportive.
Is somebody
would
that
at
could be
least help,
supportive.
yeah.
I worry about that sometimes when I've been to different types of story festivals where the work is really deep and really difficult. Obviously there's festivals that deal with the folk tales and fairy tales, but those in themselves can be very grim, no pun intended.
Grim, yeah.
You know? So I'm glad to hear that you do that, because I know that you have a background with using specific resources to help with grief that we'll talk about after your story that you brought for us today, which is a personal story, correct?
Yeah.
And what year does this take place, the story take place?
The story starts in 2007 and ends, I don't know, this week. So.
Oh, my goodness, my goodness. Okay, well, I would love to hear you tell that for us now. Would you do that?
I would love to.
Thank you.
There was a few months in the middle of 2007 when my friends started protecting me from Cozy Shack chocolate pudding like their lives depended on it. We'd be at the store or a party or sometimes even in their own homes, and I'd be about to come across the familiar yellow and brown container, and they would jump in front of me like an action hero to stop that from happening. Now, they didn't have like some weird logistical thing. They weren't like trying to tell me I needed to lose weight. It didn't have anything to do with like health or practical reasons. They were trying to save me from emotional trauma, because my partner earlier that year had used Cozy Shack chocolate pudding to end her life. Now, I know that requires some backstory, right? Here's how it goes. So my partner, Heather, was a fierce intersectional activist. She was a burlesque dancer, started her own troupe. She was a diva and a queen, and she knew what she wanted. And after 5 years of having ovarian cancer and trying all sorts of 17 different chemos, and being told by her oncologist that there was nothing more that she could do, that she had only months to live, what she wanted was to have her death not be prolonged by more suffering. We were living in Portland, Oregon at the time, and there physician-assisted suicide is actually legal, but it's America, so of course you have to do a lot of paperwork, right? So we went in, filled out all the forms in triplicate, and found out what you have to do, what the procedure is. In Portland, or in Oregon, they provide you, after you fill out all the paperwork, they provide you with a strong sedative, which needs to be mixed up with a substance that's easily absorbed. They suggest applesauce or water, and then the person takes it orally, eats it. Heather was very adamant. The last thing in my mouth, the last taste in my mouth is not going to be water or applesauce. So she wanted it to be chocolate pudding, and so, well, we made it happen. We put chocolate pudding in her grandma's antique bowl, swirled in the sedative, and she ate it, and she died. Now, that wouldn't have been my choice. It wouldn't have been my choice at all, but it wasn't my choice to make. In fact, just that morning, the morning that she died, I was curled up next to her, and she's looking at me funny, and I said, what's wrong? And she said, it's just that you're still here. And I said, what? Thanks a lot. And she said, no, if you're still here, it means I'm still here. Now, there's a lot of things that a person who you're sharing a bed with can complain about. They can complain that you snore like a rhinoceros. They can complain that you steal the covers. They can complain that you, I don't know, eat Pop-Tarts in bed and leave the crumbs all over. But when somebody complains of your continuing existence because it means that they've continued to exist, obviously that means that person is, as Heather said, tired and done. And we were used to talking about death like this. Her death had been looming for so long. The previous fall, she had this really long 6 weeks of unremitted nausea and vomiting. And I called her from the grocery store and said, do you need anything? And she said, yeah, I need a 1/4 pound of the will to live, please. And I said, oh, you know, I'm at the natural food store, and you know how it is. They only had organic, and now they're all out. She was silent for a minute and said, I had a coupon, too. Even the hospice people, I think, thought maybe we were being a little cavalier. Like, the day that she was supposed to do intake in hospice, they were supposed to come to the house. It didn't smell that much in Portland, but there was like this beautiful soft snow. And Heather was outside drinking a cup of coffee and watching it come down. And I was trying to get all the snow off the sidewalk with the only thing I had, which was a broom. I picked up some snow off the car and started to form it into a little ball. And she said, are you about to start a snowball fight? And I was like, am I? Because I wasn't sure if it was a really bad or a really great idea. So I just kind of lobbed it in her direction, and that set her off. She got a whole bunch of snow, stuck it down the back of my hoodie, and then started making little tiny ice pelts and just like pelting them with me. So I ran across the street and made a whole bunch, and from the safety of behind my neighbor's SUV, started throwing them at her. Just then, the hospice nurse pulled up. She looked at us, looked at the situation, and she said, are you having a snowball fight? And Heather said, I have a little stage 4 ovarian cancer, and all of a sudden I can't have a snowball fight? What's it going to do, kill me? And the hospice nurse, to her credit, said, that's a really good point. So I went downstairs and I tried to get myself together, but Heather and I, the whole time that hospice nurse was there, I couldn't even look at her because I just kept giggling. So shortly after Heather died, 2 months, I moved to New York City. And New York City is actually a fantastic place to be sad. In Portland, if you so much as shed like one tear on public transportation, people would be trying to hand you a Kleenex or a vegan cookie or sliding scale energy work. In New York City, to get that level of attention, I would have to carry a severed head. I would probably have to carry my own severed head. So I got a lot of support from my friends. I joined a support group, and I cried a lot on the A train. And they say time heals all wounds, which makes me want to punch whoever they is in the head, but things after time did get better. Now, I said that I would never love anyone the way I loved Heather again, and that's true, but I met somebody who was really not like Heather. Her name was Cheryl, and she was a slam poet. And she had a wicked sense of humor and a really good work ethic. And our first date, we accidentally went to a performance art piece about cancer. We were really different. I'm from rural Wisconsin. She was from an Italian-American enclave on Staten Island. She thinks pasta is a comfort food. I think pasta is what you eat when you run out of meat. My dish, you know, my like signature dish, the one I use like often on first dates or to impress people, is pot roast. She's a vegetarian. But we had a lot of fun, and she was indulgent. She let me talk about Heather, but she didn't seem threatened by a ghost diva. She'd just say in her typical lifelong New Yorker way, what? I'm gonna be jealous of a ghost? The lady's dead. On our first year anniversary, she wrote on my Facebook, just think, honey, 12 months ago, we were solitary nerds. Now we are a complete nerd unit. Cheryl was very healthy. She was a vegetarian, had been since she was a teenager. She'd been sober for 10 years. She worked out 3 times a week, and she had never smoked. She was very healthy until she wasn't. The shortness of breath that her primary care provider had called asthma, it turned out to be Hodgkin's lymphoma, and she had a cantaloupe-sized tumor in her chest. Why do they always compare tumors to fruit, she asked. Once we had a plan, chemo, followed by aggressive radiation, we sat down. I said, we've got to start telling people because we need to get support. I opened up the computer, started to type in the URL of a caregiving site, a group caregiving site. And she said, how do you know? Oh, yeah, of course. I never thought Cheryl would be anything other than fine. Even when she developed pulmonary toxicity, which is a common but often fatal reaction to the kind of chemo given for Hodgkin's. Even when she went to the hospital where she spent 3 months, I just moved into the hospital with her and slept on the radiator. The afternoon she died, there was a tear coming down my cheek, and she reached out and she said, I'm sorry, you never deserved any of this. And I said, well, I didn't deserve any of this, but I deserved you, and every moment of this has made this right here worth of it. And she was like, oh my God, you are such a cornball. But she smiled because she knew I meant it. The good thing, if there's anything good about losing 2 partners, is that you know what to do the second time. I depended on my friends, I got into a support group, and I cried a lot on the A train. After Heather died, and before I moved to New York City, my sister had given me a card, had a picture of the skyline on it. And it said, when you feel like it's always winter and never Christmas in your soul, that was a reference to the Chronicles of Narnia books that we both enjoyed as kids. Remember, New York City is a great place to start over. After Cheryl died, I took it out of the cupboard and put it back on the wall. I don't know if it's having really good, resilient genes. I don't know if it's a great support group. I don't know if it's just plain foolhardiness. But I'm calling somebody else girlfriend now. And she's fun and funny. And she doesn't mind that I have post-traumatic dead girlfriend disorder. Because sometimes when love makes least sense and hope makes no sense, you choose both. But I'm a pragmatist too. And she's really healthy, but just in case, I don't let any chocolate pudding into the house.
Thank you for sharing that very personal story with us. Heartbreaking, very powerful, but also the humor that you use in that story, which I find so amazing that you can bring that in, considering how difficult those 2 losses were in your life. Why do you think it's important as a healthcare giver, provider, to use humor?
Well, I kind of came out of the stand-up world, right? Like that was how I first came into storytelling. I was always a storyteller, but I worked as a stand-up comic for a long time. And after my first partner died, I was really afraid. I felt like you tell stories, you make comedy about what you know, but I didn't know that audiences could handle it. And I remember my very first time I planned to do something was like this New York blogger show called What You See Is What You Get. And I followed somebody who told this story about being a go-go boy, you know? And then I was gonna get up and do this allegedly funny stuff about my partner passing away. And I was so worried, and even though I was scared up, as I was walking onto the stage, I was like, I hope this works, I hope this works. And it did, and it worked perfectly. And I used to think that humor and grief, that's like an aberration to be funny in grief or in these really grave situations. But now I've realized it's actually the way that most people react. Most people need this kind of, it's like, you know, it's like the shock absorbers. It's actually what you need. And often people talk about things that are very close to their heart only in a funny way. It's the only way to get into it. And so if you miss that, if you drop that opportunity, if you don't believe in those, you actually miss that opportunity to talk with people. Yeah.
That's such a good point. The minute you were talking about grief and humor, I immediately went to the wakes in my family over the years, because as we were talking before, I'm Irish Catholic, and it's all about the fun and the stories, and there's more laughter going on at a wake than there is anything else.
Right.
And I've had friends who come from a very strict Portuguese background that have a very hard time dealing with that, because people do approach grief differently. I like your approach better with humor. I really do. I like that. So when you're writing a book about this, right? What is the title of the book going to be?
Tentatively, Grief Sucks, an Irreverent Guide to Irreverent Guide to Bereavement. And it's
Grief for Dummies.
And it's, the idea is it's an actual self-help book. It has actual, okay, so this is how you find a grief support group. Because, some people try to go to a grief support group right after death, and that doesn't actually, usually it doesn't work right afterwards. You need at least like 6 weeks, sometimes a couple months.
It's because you're just
ready.
too raw
to
be able to.
Yeah. That's not a universal, but many people feel that way, so it's helpful. And how to look for a grief group. Do you want people who are mostly your age? Do you want people who have had similar losses? Do you want people who have had losses from like a similar disease, right? So there's ways to pick it and ways to have a better experience. Information about how to deal with coworkers being awkward around your loss. Because one of the things that's hard, especially with me, I lost two partners at a very young age, comparatively, is that I've had to educate the people around me. And so one of the things I want to do is help people, because that's inevitable. There's no way you're not going to have to do some of that. But giving that information to people so that they can do, so that they can make their decisions and they have more. We just don't talk about death and grief in our culture, and so giving people more information, but giving them information in a way that's, fun, as much as anything like this can be fun, and kind of irreverent. I always say it's not really funny, it's irreverent. And that just makes it easier to kind of break down those barriers. So.
I can't wait to read that book.
Yeah, I'm excited about it too.
When will it be published?
Well, the proposal is out right now at at some different publishers. I've talked with a couple of different publishers. The folks who have published my other books, that's not a good fit for them, so I'm looking for a publisher right now, but I'm really excited about it.
Now this book here, that you so kindly brought and gave to me, Freak of Nature. What's this
Freak
about?
of Nurture.
Oh, excuse me, Freak of
Nurture,
I'm
right?
sorry.
Everyone does that. Everyone does that. So the name comes from, somebody sent me an email on my website that said, you should something, you are a freak of nature. And I was like, oh, you don't know me, you don't know my family, you would know I'm a freak of nurture, actually, not of nature.
And the light bulb went on, right?
And I was like, oh yeah, that's a perfect name for the book. So it's a collection of stories. Some of them I would say they're kind of tragicomic, all my funny stuff is a little tragic as well. Includes the stories about lots of my partners and being a nun and experiences I've had on,
which is a whole nother.
It could be a whole nother book on its own.
Oh, you actually could, because I just read some of your excerpts of your work with the Sisters of
Missionaries of Charity.
Missionaries of Charity with Mother Teresa.
Right.
That could be. I said to you before, that could be a comedy show.
Right. Yeah, it was a comedy show. They didn't think it was a comedy show, but it seemed like a comedy show to me.
You've lived so many different, I almost think of lives, so many different, with your nursing and with the sisters, and now this whole other realm with healthcare and grief and stand-up comedy. It's just amazing that you are still standing, first of all, and that you've been able to find the nurture and the humor in all of it. I think that's wonderful. I just want to briefly touch on, we've got about another minute here, your storytelling festival, Queer Memoir. When does that take place?
All right, so that's a storytelling series. This will be our 9th year. It takes place in New York City. We've never had a venue, but we really focus on stories. It's not just everyone, you go to a New York party, everyone has their one-person show, right? That's not who, we want to hear the stories from the whole LGBT community, and so we work really closely with people who never get on a stage to help them develop a story to tell. So
wonderful. And you've done that already, right?
it's been going on for 9 years. It was a monthly series for many years. Now it's quarterly.
Okay. So, boy, I don't know where you find the time to get all that done. Because putting on a festival, even just, a story slam, something once is a lot of work.
Right. It's a lot of work. And what really consumes the time is the working with the storytellers. But that's the most rewarding part, too.
Exactly. Well, would you please tell people how they can reach you, because I'm sure people want to go and learn more about your work. What is your website?
Right, so it's just my name, kellydunham.com, very simple, and that's also what I am on all social media too, so very easy to find.
Very easy to find you in email, and I'm so thrilled that you came and spent some time with us today. I'd love to have you back on once your book is out. We can talk about that.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
Fabulous.
I had such a great time. Thank you.
Oh, well, it was great to finally meet you. I know our paths will cross again. And thank you for joining us again on the Story Cafe. I hope you'll join us next time when Andrea Lovett will join me, and we will have some guests that have taken part in our story slams, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and maybe, hopefully, you'll mark that down on your calendar and come to the next story slam in New Bedford. So thank you again, Kelly. It was really wonderful to have you here. I can't wait to hear what other stage your life is in next time we meet. Thank you.